The 60s were not just a decade, they were an explosion. While the world was changing music, fashion, and the way it understood freedom, something even more wild was happening on two wheels. The British ruled with an iron fist, the Japanese arrived stealthily like apprentices who would soon become masters, and the Americans roared with engines that seemed straight out of hell. 50 years later, their technological heirs should have buried them, but they haven't succeeded. These are the 15 machines from the 60s that even today, in 2026, still outclass the modern ones. Position 15, Yamaha YDS-3. Let's change the mindset completely. Forget about big engines, fat cylinders, and weight. The Yamaha YDS-3 was tiny. It looked like a newspaper delivery bike, but it hid a racing heart that would put many higher displacement machines to shame. We are talking about a two-stroke, a concept that purists despise for being dirty and noisy, but which Yamaha turned into gold. Its 246 cubic centimeter twin-cylinder engine spat out 21 horsepower, and it did so by revving up like a Grand Prix bike. The key to the YDS-3 was weight. This thing weighed about as much as a well-fed modern bicycle, which gave it a power-to-weight ratio that exposed bikes 3 times its size. Riding a YDS-3 wasn't a stroll, it was a binary experience. You either went full throttle with the engine screaming like a banshee at the edge of the rev counter, or you didn't go at all. There was no middle ground. No such thing as a relaxed cruise. If you wanted to go slow, you were better off getting off and pushing. And when you decided to let it loose, the magic appeared. It was agile, reactive, and made you feel like you were going faster than you actually were. The catch, and it was a big one, is that two-strokes are temperamental creatures. They were thirstier than a sailor in port and smoked more than a coal locomotive. If you didn't get the oil mix right, you'd end up on foot with a seized engine, crying over a hot museum piece. But if Yamaha had an ace up its sleeve, its eternal rival Suzuki wasn't going to sit idly by. They had an ace of their own, and besides, it had 6 gears. Position 14, Suzuki T20 Super 6. While the rest of the world was struggling with 4-speed gearboxes that often didn't work well, Suzuki showed up with a machete and split the jungle in 2. The Suzuki T20 Super 6 hit the market and said, 5 gears? How cute, we're putting in 6. And it wasn't marketing, it was real. This bike, with its 247 cubic centimeter 2-stroke engine, had a 6-ratio transmission that looked like it was taken from a truck. The result was a small beast that could stay in the power band no matter what. It didn't matter if you were going uphill against the wind or towing an imaginary sidecar, you always had one more gear to stretch the joy. Its 29 horsepower made it one of the fastest two-strokes of its era. It accelerated with a fury that scared larger displacement 4-strokes and left its Japanese competitors wondering how they had done it. Suzuki called it the Super 6 without hesitation, and they weren't bluffing. It was fast, light, and had that spark of madness that only two-strokes can provide. The problem was that all that mechanical complexity came at a price. 6 gears meant more parts, more things that could fail, and more maintenance. And like any good two-stroke, it remained a demanding lover that required constant pampering and a perfect oil mix. In fact, one of the most ambitious designs almost became a legendary failure. But from that failure, the obsession with perfection was born. Position 13, Honda CB450 Black Bomber. Honda had a problem. They had conquered the world with small, reliable, and simple bikes. But in the United States and Europe, prestige was measured in cubic centimeters. They needed a big bike, and they needed it now. So with the haste of a student the night before an exam, Honda designed the CB450 Black Bomber. And what a design! Honda decided that its 444 cubic centimeter parallel twin engine would use a 180-degree firing order. This means both pistons go up and down at the same time instead of alternating as most do. On the engineer's chalkboard, this promised incredible smoothness of operation. In reality, the Black Bomber vibrated like a washing machine on the spin cycle, and it sounded like an ill-tempered tractor. But it wasn't all bad. The bike was fast, very fast. It could maintain 160 kilometers per hour without breaking a sweat and had a technical sophistication that surpassed almost anything European. Dual overhead cams, something unthinkable in a street bike of that time. The problem is that at highway speeds, driving it was like massaging your spine with a jackhammer. The vibrations were so brutal that the mirrors became useless, the bolts loosened themselves, and the rider's hands fell asleep after 20 minutes. Honda had built a high-tech torture device that coincidentally went very fast. But while the Japanese were experimenting on the other side of the continent, in a small corner of Spain, a company with an unpronounceable name was building some of the most beautiful bikes in history. Position 12, Bultaco Metralla. Here comes a bike from a country that many wouldn't know how to point out on a map, yet it was crushing it on racetracks all over the world. Bultaco was a Spanish company founded by a genius named Paco Bulto, who decided that if he couldn't compete in displacement, he would compete in talent. And the Metralla was his masterpiece. We are talking about a bike that came in 200 and 250 cubic centimeter displacements, and in both cases it was a work of art on wheels. The Metralla wasn't just a motorcycle, it was a functional sculpture. The lines of the tank, the swing arm, the seat, everything was designed with such exquisite taste that it made you wonder how it could come out of a factory and not a boutique customization shop. The engineering matched the design. They were light, incredibly maneuverable, and had a specific power output that put larger displacement bikes to shame. On a twisty road, a Bultaco Metralla could keep pace with much larger and more powerful machines, and it did so with astounding elegance. The problem, as always with small brands, was the distribution network. Outside of Spain, finding a Bultaco dealer was like finding a needle in a haystack, and if something broke, forget about buying the spare part around the corner. While Bultaco proved that talent knows no borders, in Italy, they took it one step further. There, they didn't just build bikes, they built art with an engine, and sometimes that art was so complex it was scary. Position 11, Ducati 250 Mach 1. We have arrived at Italian seriousness. The Ducati 250 Mach 1 was not a motorcycle, it was a statement of principles. Ducati looked at the world and said, "We are not going to make bikes for going to work. We make rolling sculptures for men to dream about." And the Mach 1 was that dream come true. Its great magic trick was the desmodromic valve system. While the rest of the world used springs to close the valves, Ducati said, "Springs are for cowards. We are going to close them with a mechanical system because it is more complicated, more expensive, and much better." And they were right. That system allowed its single-cylinder 249 cubic centimeter engine to rev like a racing bike, stretching its power to unsuspected limits. It sounded like a machine gun when you revved it up, and it responded with a grip-inducing aggressiveness. It was beautiful, sophisticated, and had that Italian je ne sais quoi that made you forgive all its sins, because it had them. The desmodromic system was a marvel when it worked, but when something went wrong, you needed an aerospace engineer with a degree in precision mechanics to fix it. Furthermore, being a highly tuned single cylinder, it vibrated quite a bit, not at the level of the Black Bomber, but enough that, after a while, you'd wonder if your hands were still holding the handlebars. But not all of Italy followed the path of radical complexity. In Mandello del Lario, another brand was building something completely different, something that would last for decades with hardly any changes. Position 10, Moto Guzzi V7. The Moto Guzzi 5.7 doesn't grab your attention at first glance. It is discreet, almost austere, but this apparently simple bike is the grandmother of one of the longest-lived dynasties in motoring history. That transverse V-twin engine of 703 cubic centimeters that you see there, with the cylinders poking out to the sides like the wings of a metallic bird, is the same concept that Moto Guzzi still uses today. The V7 was born for a very specific purpose, to equip the police and the army. That is why it was built like a tank. Robust, reliable, and with a torque delivery so smooth it seemed infinite. The shaft drive eliminated chain problems, and the whole package was designed to run for years with minimal maintenance. It wasn't a bike for racers or Sunday riders. It was for people who needed their vehicle to start every morning, whether it was raining, snowing, or sunny. It was the motorcycling equivalent of a good work boot. Ugly, but indestructible. The problem is that, indeed, it was a bit dull. Compared to Japanese or British sport bikes, the V7 had the charisma of a refrigerator. It was heavy, not particularly fast, and its dynamic behavior was, let's say, calm. But the V7 created a market, comfortable and reliable touring, that remains one of the most important in the sector today. However, while the Italians were building to last, across the pond in the United States, there were those building to frighten. Position 9, Harley-Davidson Sportster Exelteach. And now, gentlemen, grip the handlebars tight because this is Harley-Davidson in its purest state. The Sportster XLCH was America's middle finger to anyone who said Yankee bikes were slow and heavy. This was the hot rod version of the Sportster, a stripped-down machine, lightened and tuned for one thing only: going fast in a straight line. The XLCH came standard with high-compression pistons, radical cams, and just enough equipment to be street legal. Everything else, fenders, superfluous chrome, every gram of weight, flew straight into the trash in the name of speed. It was a bike built for the quarter mile, for street racing, and for terrifying anyone who came within its reach. That 883 cubic centimeter Ironhead V-twin engine roared like the apocalypse itself when you opened the throttle. And it sounded, oh, how it sounded. It was the sound of American freedom, raw, violent, and unfiltered. The XLCH could stand up to anything in an acceleration race, and moreover, it did so with an aesthetic that chilled the blood. But of course, it was the complete opposite of a civilized bike. It was noisy, crude, unreliable, and had the comfort of a concrete bench. Furthermore, those radical cams meant it had no power at the bottom end. To get it going, you had to give it hell as if you hated it. But when you wanted to make a statement of intent, and that statement was, "I'm the baddest in the neighborhood and I don't care who knows it," there was nothing like the XLCH. It was pure American attitude on two wheels. Position 8, BMW R69 sedan. Here we have a bike that posed a revolutionary question in the 60s. What if riding a motorcycle didn't have to be an exercise in sacrifice? The BMW R69S was first class on two wheels, an oasis of luxury and refinement in the middle of a desert of noisy, vibrating machines. Its 594 cubic centimeter boxer twin engine was smooth as silk, so balanced it seemed to float over the asphalt. The shaft drive eliminated that eternal nuisance of the chain, and the build quality was so solid it felt like a Swiss watch with wheels. This was the bike chosen by serious travelers, those who wanted to swallow kilometers without arriving in pieces. It had a comfortable riding position, decent aerodynamic protection, and a reliability that allowed you to cross Europe without fear of being stranded. The problem is that, to be fair, it was about as exciting as a neighborhood association meeting. The R69S was practical, efficient, and magnificently built, but it lacked that touch of madness, that spark that makes you want to get up at 6 in the morning just to go for a directionless ride. It was a bike for the head, not for the heart. Additionally, it cost more than many cars of the time, and finding a dealership was mission impossible. But it set a precedent. It proved you could travel with class, and that in the 60s was quite a statement. Position 7, Royal Enfield Interceptor. Here comes one of those bikes that almost nobody talks about, but those who know it revere it. The Royal Enfield Interceptor was the fastest bike that the British-born Indian firm ever built, and in its day, it could demolish most of its more famous competitors in a straight line without breaking a sweat. Its 736 cubic centimeter parallel twin engine delivered around 52 horsepower, a serious figure for 1962 when most bikes were at half that. The Interceptor could reach 175 kilometers per hour and maintain that speed all day, without sweating, without complaining, without threatening to blow up. Royal Enfield manufactured it in very limited numbers, which is why it isn't as famous as it deserves to be, but those who knew, knew. If you wanted a fast, reliable bike with no frills, this was your secret weapon. The problem was the build quality, which varied as much as the British weather. Some Interceptors were indestructible, true tanks that lasted decades. Others seemed made on a Friday afternoon and would disassemble themselves if you looked at them the wrong way. And being from a small manufacturer, finding spare parts was an adventure in itself. But when you got one of the good ones, the Interceptor was pure magic on wheels. It proved that you didn't have to be a giant to build a high-flying bike. But the best was yet to come, just when the British seemed to have everything under control. Position 6, Triumph Trident T150. Get ready, because this is what could have been and wasn't. The Triumph Trident T150 represents the swan song of the British industry, the final flutter before the catastrophe. This bike was so advanced, so well designed, and so beautiful that it should have been the battering ram with which England halted the Japanese invasion. Its 740 cubic centimeter inline 3-cylinder engine was a masterpiece of engineering. It sounded like no other engine on Earth, a mix of a deep snarl and a mechanical howl that made your hair stand on end. It delivered 58 horsepower, a true beast in 1969, and handled with a precision that put its rivals to shame. The Trident was fast, reliable, and gorgeous. It was British engineering at its absolute peak. Everything about it smelled of quality and sophistication, but it arrived late. Very late. By the time the Trident appeared in dealerships, Honda had already launched the CB750, and the entire world was looking toward Japan with wide eyes. Additionally, Triumph was in a financial crisis and couldn't produce it in sufficient quantities. The Trident remained a minor masterpiece, a flash of genius in a foretold twilight, but it reminded us that the English still had a lot to say. And speaking of saying, the next bike didn't speak, it screamed. And it did so from the podium. Position 5, BSA Gold Star DBD34. This isn't a bike, it's a weapon of war. The BSA Gold Star DBD34 wasn't made for commuting or for Sunday rides. It was made to win races, period. Its 499 cubic centimeter single-cylinder engine was the most advanced racing power plant of its time. It featured a light alloy cylinder head, massive valves, racing cams, and a compression ratio so high it required racing fuel. No exceptions. This beast spat out brutal power from a single cylinder. The Gold Star dominated everything put in front of it: road racing, trials, motocross, hill climbs. If there was a competition on two wheels, chances are a Gold Star was winning it. It was so superior that its rivals almost threw in the towel, but of course it was an indomitable animal. It roared, it vibrated, it was noisy, and it demanded constant care like an opera diva. The vibration was so savage it could loosen your fillings. But when it came to pure, raw performance, nothing could touch it. It was the bike true racers bought when they wanted to win, and boy did they win. Position 4. Triumph Bonneville T120. We have reached the icon. When someone says classic motorcycle, the image that comes to mind is this one. The Triumph Bonneville T120 wasn't just a motorcycle, it was a cultural phenomenon that defined the aesthetic of an entire decade. Its 649 cubic centimeter parallel twin engine was the perfect combination of power, sound, and style. 46 horsepower that made you feel fast without needing to ride like a kamikaze, and an exhaust that sounded like heavenly music. But beyond the numbers, the Bonneville was pure beauty. It was the bike of the rockers, the cafe racers, and all those who wanted to project an image of effortless rebellion. It appeared in movies, inspired songs, and became the symbol of counterculture on wheels. When Marlon Brando needed a bike that looked tough, he chose a Triumph. Now, the British bikes of the era had two mortal sins. They leaked oil from every gasket, and their electrical systems seemed designed by an enemy. They left puddles wherever they parked and refused to start at the worst possible moment. But no one cared when they were riding a Bonneville. It had soul, character, and enough charisma to forgive all its flaws. It was imperfection turned into a work of art. Position 3. Norton Commando 750. Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the pinnacle of British engineering. The Norton Commando 750 was everything English bikes should have always been. Fast, reliable, smooth, and with an aesthetic that would take your breath away. Norton's engineers solved the great problem of British twin cylinders: vibration. They mounted the entire engine and transmission assembly on rubber mounts, creating the isolastic system that made the Commando as smooth as a turbine, but without losing an ounce of that special British character. Its 745 cubic centimeter engine delivered 60 horsepower and could reach 180 kilometers per hour. But the important thing is that it did so without shaking your teeth loose. The Commando won the Motorcycle News Machine of the Year award for 5 consecutive years. 5 years. This bike was so good that it kept Norton alive during the early 70s almost single-handedly. It was beautiful, fast, manageable, and had just the right amount of character to make you fall madly in love. The problem was that, as a proper British machine, quality control was a lottery. Some were indestructible, others a bottomless money pit. But when everything worked, the Commando was perfection on wheels, the closest England ever came to eternal glory. Position 2, Velocette Venom Clubman or Thruxton. And now, the surprise, the bike that very few expect but that connoisseurs know deserves to be here. The Velocette Venom in its Clubman or Thruxton versions was the last great English single-cylinder bullet. While everyone was looking at multi-cylinders, Velocette continued perfecting the single cylinder to unsuspected limits. Its 500 cubic centimeter engine was a work of precision. With the Thruxton fairing, it was capable of nearing 100 miles per hour, something incredible for a single piston in the 60s. But the important thing wasn't the top speed, it was how it got there. The Venom was a rider's bike. It demanded that you knew how to handle it, that you understood its reactions, that you breathed with it. It was light, agile, and had a chassis that seemed to read your mind. On a twisty road, it could keep pace with much more powerful bikes because you went flat out the whole time without fear, without complexes. It was pure motorcycling essence. The problem, as always, was availability. Velocette was a craftsperson, not a mass production factory. They were expensive, hard to get, and when something broke, the odyssey to find spare parts was epic. But the Venom represented the indomitable spirit of British engineering. Proof that with talent and obsession, you could challenge the giants, until the ultimate giant arrived. Position 1, Honda CB 750. Here it is, the one that changed everything. The bike that grabbed the global industry, shook it by the hair, and reconfigured it at its whim. The Honda CB 750 didn't just revolutionize motorcycling, it invented it again from scratch. Before the CB 750, bikes were temperamental, noisy, unreliable, and demanding machines. You had to pamper them, understand their quirks, and accept their whims. Honda arrived and asked, what if we build a bike that simply works? Its 736 cubic centimeter inline four-cylinder engine was something no one had ever seen on a street bike. 4 cylinders, overhead camshaft, electric start, front disc brake, and a reliability that made British manufacturers cry with envy. 67 horsepower, 200 kilometers per hour, and all of it without drama, without insufferable vibrations, without oil leaks. But most importantly, it was affordable. Honda had discovered how to mass-produce a sophisticated, reliable, and incredibly fast bike at a price that mortals could pay. The CB 750 didn't just symbolically kill the British industry, it buried it with a smile. It ushered in the era of the superbikes and established Japan as the undisputed master of the engine. Every modern bike, every sport bike, every naked, each one of them carries a bit of the CB 750's DNA. It was the beginning of the end of an era, but also the beginning of everything that came after. And for that reason, it remains today better than many modern ones. Because without it, quite simply, the modern ones wouldn't exist.